I'm not very good at doing it all in one day. I would lose the will to live. But I can do it every evening on the bounce. So my latest one has been called the World's Toughest Race. Has anyone seen that? No?
No.
Well, that's quite good actually. You can watch it after. So, it's presented by Bear Grylls. He doesn't actually do a lot of the tough stuff though. He just seems to fly around in a helicopter and he commentates on these poor contestants who are at death's door beneath him. And he meets them at checkpoints to offer words of encouragement like, yes, you can do it, you've come this far, when they're on their knees. And the race is actually called the Eco Challenge, and this year it was the Eco Challenge Fiji. And they, in this ultimate expedition race, there are 66 teams from 30 different countries, and they race non-stop for 11 days, 24 hours a day, for 416 miles. So if they choose to stop and have a nap, that's counted in their time. So they get very, very little sleep. I'll say that again, 11 days, 24 hours a day for 416 miles. It's crazy. At the beginning of the year, I noticed when I looked back through my sermon folder, which is now all nicely organised on my laptop, thanks to lockdown, that I talked about God on the journey, about God being with us. And we looked back at Jacob's journey in Genesis and God's promise to Jacob that he is with him. And Jacob was still scared, but God was with him in the unknown. And when his path changed, and when he didn't think God was going to be there, God was still there. And I shared the phrases from the Two Popes film at that time that had not long come out. God moves towards us. Where shall we find him if he's always moving? On the journey. In June, coincidentally, when I last spoke, we looked again at God's promise to be with us through the story of Moses that time. And I read Spurgeon's commentary on Isaiah 40. And I'll read it again just now to remind us. I'm going to have to read it because I can't quote Spurgeon. But Isaiah 40:31 says, "But they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles." This is very much when they begin. They're all for flying, and God gives them a glorious flight. Land, they are so happy and so delighted, but they will do better than that. Isaiah 40:31 goes on, "They shall run and not be weary." Is that better than flying? Yes, it is. A better pace to keep up. But God enables his servants at length to keep along the road of duty and to run in it. But there is a better pace than that. And the verse continues, "And they shall walk and not faint." It's a good, steady pace. It's the pace that Enoch kept when he walked with God. Sometimes it's easier to take a running spurt than it is to keep on day by day, walk, in the sobriety of Christian conversation. Many under excitement can run a race, but it is the best of all to be able steadily to walk in with God the Lord. The Lord bring us to that pace. They shall walk and not faint. It's now nearly September and we're still journeying through the pandemic. And without having planned a series, I seem to have a third message on this travelling theme, and I didn't plan it, but that's the way it's gone. So, in the world's toughest race of 416 miles, it's not walking or running. It's not even some kind of ultimate Ironman with running, cycling and swimming. Although there is walking, there is running, there is cycling and there is swimming. There's also hiking, climbing, sailing, paddleboarding, rafting. And it clearly takes a really special kind of crazy person to want to do that. Throughout the programme, they cut to little interviews with the contestants that have obviously, some of which have been filmed before it started, some of which are as it's happening, and some of which are at the end. You can tell the difference by what they say. But many of them talk about why they're doing the race. Lots of them have suffered huge tragedy, the loss of loved ones, life-changing injuries. A lot of them are army vets. Some have battled depression and disability just to be there. Some are competing to raise awareness, and some are hoping to inspire others, and some are just there to support friends and family who wanted to do it and needed members for their team. They're the ones I think end up regretting it most. As you can imagine, in a challenge that tough, not all the teams finish. They can only finish as a team if every member makes it over the line. If one of them fails, they're all out and they all have to stop. And one of the teams that really touched me was an American father, son, and 2 of his friends. The father was in his late 60s, and he'd planned to run the race with a different team called the Stray Dogs, a team of his old friends, also all in their late 60s. But he had Alzheimer's disease, and it was progressing in the lead up to the race. And his son had realised that he would need support to be able to get around the course. He had fantastic navigational skills, he was a really fit, active guy, but he couldn't remember how to do his coat up or put his gloves on anymore. So his son went with him and they formed this new team. And the camera crew interview them quite a few times throughout the race as it gets tougher and tougher. And the father and son both separately draw the same comparison between the challenges of the race and the challenges of their own lives. Sadly, they know that in both, things will get tougher for them, but they say that whatever happens, we can face it together. Another of the teams don't make the finish. A bike crash injures one of the team and they're forced to stop. They've come so far and are closer to the finish than they were to the start. They're absolutely devastated. And as the camera crew interview them later, they said something like this: "Is it right to just say we didn't finish the race, that we didn't achieve everything we wanted to? That doesn't seem right, to just say we didn't finish. That takes away from all that we've done over the past week. It's been an amazing week. We've come so far and we've done so much." And as the teams travel through the jungle, swampland, highland, sea, there are painful injuries that make me wince. Serious cases of heat stroke. At one point, one poor guy just wants to lie down, and the rest of his loving teammates, encouraging him, tie a bungee around the waistband of his shorts and tow him behind them on the hike while he walks like this, like a zombie. And you think, oh my goodness. But some teams are faster, stronger, better at navigating the route than the others. Some are really struggling, but they keep going. 2 teams in the race are from Fiji, the country where it's held, and they're determined that they're going to finish this race. The one team is one of the faster, stronger teams, but at every checkpoint along the way, they stop and they wait for the other Fijian team to make sure that they're okay, to give them any help and support they need, to help them plan the next bit of the route together. And then they travel off separately, and then they wait again. They end up waiting at pretty much every checkpoint for the other Fijian team. And then they cross the finish line together at the back of the pack. The last 2 teams over the line, but together. And they're so proud of the fact, and they're so delighted that they're all there together. For each team and for each individual, the race is different. Different challenges prove to be too much for them. They find different ways through. And it made me think, 2,000 years ago, Jesus sent out his disciples in little teams, in 2s. He gave them authority to cast out demons, to heal people. And he says to them, take no backpack, no mobile phone, no credit card, no first aid kit, or at least the equivalent from that time. Take nothing for the journey except a staff, no bread, no bag, no money in your belts. Wear sandals, but not an extra shirt. At least that's Mark's account. If you read Luke's account, he says, don't even take a staff. Nothing. Now, we could get bogged down in that as to why the 2 accounts are different, but I think it's probably as simple as to the ones who needed the staff to be able to be mobile, he said you can take it, and to the ones who just would have liked it for a bit of extra help on the way, he said you couldn't, okay? We'll just leave it with that. But my big worry would be that you couldn't take food or money. You know, if you've got some money, you're all right anywhere, aren't you, generally? But they did it. The disciples went out with nothing except maybe their handy staff for a few of them. And they did it. They preached so that people would repent. And they drove out demons. And they anointed sick people with oil. And they healed them. And we don't get to read all of those accounts in the Bible. I bet they were fantastic adventures. But just as the Bible says, if they were all written down, we'd never fit them all in. We don't hear what they did about the people that they met on those things. But what we do know is that they went out, fishermen, a tax collector, political zealots, ordinary guys, and they changed lives. They went out in their little teams of 2 and they changed lives. Because they didn't go alone. Justin Welby shared this on his social media accounts on Friday night, and I noticed my mum put it in the Capel Ed group as well. The Lord is here, his spirit is with us. We need not fear, his spirit is with us. We are surrounded by love, his spirit is with us. We are immersed in peace, his spirit is with us. We rejoice in hope, his spirit is with us. We travel in faith, his spirit is with us. There have been so many reminders throughout this year that God is with us. He's spoken it over his children through so many of his people, just as he spoke over Jacob and over Moses in those wilderness times. We need nothing else. God has sent us out. God is with us. Not like Bear Grylls up in a helicopter, hovering over, dropping down every so often to share words of encouragement. No, with us, alongside us, before us and behind us. God is with us. Later on, in Mark's account, bear in mind this is after the disciples have gone out and done some miracles on their own. They're travelling across a lake. I'll read it to you. And Mark tells us, first of all, this is important. Jesus saw that they were struggling, straining at the oars because the wind was against them. So later that night, the boat was in the middle of the lake and he was alone on land, Jesus. Jesus saw the disciples straining at the oars because the wind was against them. Shortly before dawn, he went out to them, walking on the lake. He was about to pass by them, but when they saw him walking on the lake, they thought he was a ghost. They cried out because they all saw him and were terrified. Immediately he spoke to them and said, "Take courage, it is I, don't be afraid." Then he climbed into the boat with them, and the wind died down. They were completely amazed, for they had not understood about the loaves. Their hearts were hardened. That is to say, they didn't get what had happened with the loaves and the fishes miracle just before. They hadn't really grasped who Jesus was and what he could do. What usually strikes me in this passage is the bit that Jesus walks on the water. I mean, we all like that bit, don't we? It's like, wow. If you ask people if they can name a miracle in the Bible, that's usually the one that they know, that Jesus could walk on water. You know, it's in the Andrew Lloyd Webber things as well, isn't it, about the walking on the water. It's in the songs, people know that one. He walks on the water, he gets into the boat, and he calms the storm. It might be just me, but I tend to always focus on the ending in these stories. And we've reflected on that tendency of mine before. We live through Good Friday knowing Sunday is coming. We miss the stories of the people in the moments before Jesus seems to show up. He's always there, of course. He's been interceding for these people on the shore. In verse 48, the disciples are struggling in the middle of the lake, in the dark, in the storm. They're exhausted. They aren't making the shore. I can see those people on that ultimate challenge, and they're there with the oars, and they're these big guys and these really fit, healthy, athletic women, and they're rowing like this for anything. And the wind's against them and they're struggling, and they're doing the same on the paddleboard. And then they make them do the same thing on a raft, and they give them a bamboo stick as a paddle, which doesn't really do anything anyway. But they're straining and they keep going. And that was the disciples in the middle of the lake in a storm. Jesus had said to them, "Go over there to Bethsaida, I'll catch you up." So they are determined to get across this lake. They're straining at the oars, they're battling against the wind, and they're moving forward slowly in the direction that they've been sent, but they're making very, very slow progress, if any. And then Jesus walks across the water towards them. They don't ask him for help. They cry out because they're absolutely terrified, and now they think, here comes a ghost. You know, just when you think can't get any worse, you're stuck in the middle of a lake, you can't move, and here's a ghost now, and they scream. You know, you can see it, the fear, you can imagine it. And Jesus must think, Father, come on, give me something to work with here. But he stops and he calms them down. He calms them first. Don't be afraid. He calms them first. Then he gets into the boat with them, and then the wind dies down and the storm calms. There's so much just in that little passage. There is a a time when the disciples are doing exactly what Jesus has asked them to do, but they're struggling because everything seems to be against them and they aren't making any progress. As a little aside, that was me last week trying to buy a kitchen in B&Q with a local authority purchase card. I was that person who holds up the whole queue because your card doesn't work, and then you try and ring the bank, and then the bank tell you it should work, and then you try and ring the local authority to say, my card isn't working, what have you done? And they tell you it should work, and then the lovely lady on the B&Q checkout says, why don't you try and do a click and collect? So then you get your phone out, you try and type in on the tiny screen the internet order of the stuff that's on your trolley, and then the queue at B&Q is getting longer and longer with all these people in face masks who just wanted to nip in quick and get paid. That was me, everything was against me. It took us 6 days to buy a kitchen. We went to B&Q 3 times. However, there we go. Battling against everything. Jesus crosses the lake in his timing, not theirs, not as soon as they start to struggle. The disciples don't think to call out to Jesus for help. They're screaming in terror. They don't even think to shout for him. They know he's over on the shore. Jesus helps them anyway, even though they didn't cry out for him. Jesus calms the storm in the disciples first. Then the wind stops. There are times when God needs to do a work in us before he works on the situation around us. There's no template in the Bible when we read through it for an easy race. We read over and over again of huge blessing, but also of huge tragedy, struggle and trial. Keep paddling. Keep going. 2 years ago, I heard Tori James speak at a conference. She's kind of the polar opposite of me in terms of what women are like. She's all, gung-ho and outdoorsy and stuff. And she's a bit more like Laura. And she's the first Welsh woman to have climbed Everest. And I might have shared about her experience before because it really spoke to me. And climbing Everest is not as simple, not that it would be simple anyway, as just climbing up. You start at base camp. Well, you've got to get to base camp first. I think that's an expedition in itself. Once you get to base camp, you climb to Camp 1, called the Valley of Silence. And then you don't just camp there for a bit and then climb up to the next camp. You have to go back down. So you go to base camp, you trek there, you climb up to Camp 1, and then you have to climb back down to base camp. And then, when you've acclimatized, you climb up again. But this time you can go as far as Camp 2. And then the same thing again. You climb back down to base camp, all the way back down to base camp. Then you can climb to Camp 3, the wall. And the official advice for this part of the climb, she told me, is to watch your head and lean on your legs, not the rope. There's nothing to rely on except yourself and your legs. And then it gets worse as you climb higher and you get to Camp 4 and it's known as the death zone and it all sounds absolutely horrific. But the ups and downs of that climbing route surprised me. I knew you just couldn't climb straight up. I knew you had to stop and you had to acclimatize. But I didn't realise that in order for your body to acclimatise and to be able to go on, it needed to go back. You have to come back down before you can reach the summit. Just think about that. Sometimes we feel like we're going backwards, don't we? Sometimes we're in the boat with Jesus and all is calm. Sometimes the storm rages around us and Jesus calms our fears and we know that he is with us. We have that deep sense. Sometimes we are struggling against the elements and Jesus seems like some kind of distant, strange figure and all we can do is cry out in fear. Keep paddling. Sometimes we need to wait in the middle of the lake and sometimes we need to climb back down the mountain again and again. Hebrews 12:12 is an interesting verse. It's the bit after talking about the great cloud of witnesses that surround us and how we should persevere, keep running our race with faith, keep going. But it says this, strengthen your feeble arms and weak knees, or in another translation, which I prefer, lift up the hands which hang down. And then in verse 13 it says, make level paths for your feet, so that the lame may not be disabled, but rather healed. Lift up the hands which hang down. Strengthen your weak knees. Make level paths for your feet, so that the lame may not be disabled, but rather healed. Hands hang down when they're tired. Knees buckle after long efforts when strength fails. You could see that in the race. You saw people's knees go. You saw their hands and their heads droop. I want us to make an effort this morning to lift up our hands, or you could do the hands of the people in your extended households because you're allowed to touch them. The hope of heaven stands and restores us at all times. The verses in Hebrews echo verses way back in Isaiah 35, which say, strengthen the feeble hands, steady the knees that give way. Say to those with fearful hearts, be strong, do not fear, your God will come. Strengthen the feeble hands, steady the knees that give way. Say to those with fearful hearts, be strong, do not fear, your God will come. Make the path straight by removing the things that hinder you and the things that are causing those around you to struggle and to stumble. Today is the Sabbath, Shabbat, a moment of rest to reach up and straighten out so that we can keep paddling and keep going, so that we can go out in our ones and twos, so that we can, just like those ordinary guys all those years ago, change lives. I'd like you to stand if you're able, just a moment, or at least raise your hands if you can. If you're sitting with someone who you'd like to touch, you might like to raise hands with them. Come on, we'll do this, and then everybody walking their dogs will think they've all gone nuts. Totally lost the plot now, the church. Just raise your hands. I'm just going to say a prayer over you, a prayer of blessing. Father, we thank you this morning that you are you, and that you can do more than we will ever grasp. You are the God who made the mountains and the valleys, the jungles and the seas, who knitted our innermost being, who knew that our bodies would need to go down before they could go back up. Father, renew our strength once again today, so that we may lift our hands to heaven, strengthen our knees to carry us. Show us the things that we need to remove from our paths. Remind us not to be discouraged in a journey that is up and down, 2 steps forward and sometimes 2 full steps back. Give us the wisdom and strength to lift one another. Today, as we sail in the boat on a glorious day feeling close to you, or as we struggle against the storm not even recognizing you, you are with us. Your spirit is in us. Fill us anew through these raised hands this morning. We ask this in the name of Jesus, who walks beside us. He probably laughs at us when we shriek out in fear, but he loves us and stays where we send him. Father, we thank you. Amen.